You're listening to the Blue Lies Podcast, where we uncover the truth about America's cops. I'm Jeff Wolf. I spent 20 years in the law enforcement community, and now I'm standing up for cops. If you're like me, you're tired of reading headlines like NFL honors gunman killed while trying to kill police officers after a pursuit, or SRO dismissed by a local school because of her blue line flag. Or maybe it's the LADA who wanted to dismiss the gun enhancement charge against a cop killer in order to get him a lighter sentence. On and on the headlines go that amount to the sum total of a war on police like this nation has never seen. I decided to speak out in a book entitled Blue Lies: The War on Justice and the Conspiracy to Weaken America's Cops. In this 3-part podcast mini-series, we're going to talk to police officers, active and retired, about the war on America's police. We're going to uncover the blue lies, and we're going to speak out against those who wish us harm. Join me for the next few minutes for the Blue Lies Podcast. My guest today is retired Sergeant Darren Burch, a 29-year veteran with the Phoenix Police Department. He was the Silent Witness Program Director at the time of his retirement. His prior assignments include Detective Supervisor with Crimes Against Children Unit, Night Shift Supervisor with the Homicide Unit, and Detective with the Adult Sex Crimes Unit. The bulk of his investigative career has been dedicated to the apprehension of sexual predators, with over 30 years of law enforcement experience, having also held a position with Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and the U.S. Army Military Intelligence. Darren has received numerous awards, to include the Medal of Life Saving and the Army Commendation Medal. He was also named Investigator of the Year by the Arizona Attorney General's Office, Detective of the Year by the Phoenix Police Department, and has over 100 written commendations, a whole lot more than me. Sergeant Burch is the author of the award-winning Twisted But True book trilogy, and it's filled with hilarious, dark, and compelling true crime stories. He was the featured detective on the ID Channel series American Detective with Lieutenant Joe Kenda in the series finale, their episode 10, called Lights Out. Sergeant Burch, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. The honor is all mine. Thank you for the invite.
You're too kind. Well, I was on your podcast a couple of months ago when my book, Blue Lies, was released, and so it's my pleasure to reciprocate that honor. So I want to start out just by talking about this Lights Out case that was featured by the ID channel, and I do that because I just watched it in preparation for this episode, and it was amazing. Just give us a short synopsis if you can. I know it's difficult to do that because this investigation spanned literally months, but if you can just give us a short synopsis of that investigation that was featured on the ID channel.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I had been in sex crimes, probably about 4 years, which isn't a lot of time, as we know, but enough time where you think you know what is going on, and got the case of my career. That's why in the book, I reflected it as that one case. I always feel that every detective has that one case for whatever reason, multitude of reasons. Luckily, this one was my one case. I was able to solve it. But it took actually a couple of years to finally get him in prison where he belongs. And basically, it was a horrific afternoon home invasion of an elderly couple. And again, I work sex crimes, so there was a sex component, sadly. Horrifically. It was with an object, and I won't go into detail, but she was horribly scarred physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They were married more than 60 some odd years. They're in their 80s. And so this was sadly, the the end of their marriage, if you will. He died. She degraded quickly, if not immediately. She gave several different versions of the suspect description. So we really had nothing in terms of eyewitness. The physical evidence was even more sparse, if that's possible. We had nothing. We had no DNA. We held the scene for 2 nights. We had that luxury. Both were in the hospital. And again, one ended up dying, and the other, stayed in the hospital. So it was a difficult case. It was daunting. We had no physical evidence. We had no eyewitnesses. We had, if you will, nothing. So I was relying on, some type of similar crime, and then use the evidence from that. And I wasn't finding anything, at least not locally at first. And then we went nationally very quickly, days. We went national. Back then, I'm dating myself, but this was in the 90s. So we used teletypes and things like that. We didn't have the benefit of the internet and how they do now. And it took some time, and thankfully, as we discussed off camera, Florida had this wonderful detective and I was saying these things out weekly because I couldn't wrap my head around that there wasn't some person out there doing this, consistently. Did it a horrific crime here? It wasn't his first rodeo. The way he left no physical evidence, the way he used things at the scene, left nothing behind, took almost nothing.
If I could interrupt you, if I'm not mistaken, you had nothing but a footprint in the dirt outside.
We did.
The home.
We had a most beautiful shoe impression in the back alleyway that was consistent with the fleeing of the scene. That was Reebok, and it could not have been more pristine. It had some nice indicators, so had some possible uniqueness to it, where we could do a comparative analysis later. There was a lot of aspects to it, but the basic problem with this person was he was a part of a gypsy clan, and they went all over the country. And by the time other states and cities were finally seeing my bulletins, there was probably about 8 or 10 states that were involved with this monster. And I finally found him, again, thanks to Florida, Karen, Palacio. Thanks to Karen Palacio with the county, which she ended up going with the city in Florida. They had an actual name to the suspect. So now I have a name, and now I'm tracking him. It was a false name, but still it's a name. And again, he ended up doing a similar crime, a home invasion of an elderly couple. Luckily, the elderly couple had an elderly daughter living upstairs, and she called the police, and Chicago caught him. But by the time I finally got my hands on him, he was going to be getting released. Even back then, they had some weird things in Chicago, and not with PD. PD was wonderful, but the prosecution was letting him go, unfortunately, and so the insanity defense sort of thing. So I was able to get my mitts on him, bring him back to Phoenix, where again the story just didn't stop. He ends up escaping in our jail momentarily before his monster side of him got the best of him, and he stopped to rape someone, a detention officer. And and the end result. None of this
was in the ID channel show.
Yeah, correct. The book, it goes up and down, and that's why it spans, a year and change. Whereas the ID channel had to take liberties to get into a 45-minute time slot.
Right.
But I won't give away the ending. There is, believe it or not, in a sense, a happy ending. But not for the victims. Beautiful couple, Hazel and John Durnovich. So thank you for talking about that.
Well, the reason I bring that up, Darren, is just to illustrate the fact that this is the kind of investigative work, and in most cases investigative genius, that takes place in thousands of cases around the country by skilled and dedicated police officers. Justice is done because of the work of dedicated police officers who have not only put their lives on the line for the public and for the innocent, but work tirelessly to bring to justice these monsters that perpetrate violence on innocent humanity. And would you characterize what happened in this case the same thing that happens around the country literally on a daily basis when violence is perpetrated on the innocent, that a dedicated detective or patrol officer or whatever digs and digs and digs with the motivation to find and bring to justice these monsters?
Absolutely. First, I'll agree with 100% of your assessment of the great men and women out there in law enforcement, both patrol as well as follow-up investigations. They do an amazing job, and we have a scenario that we live in, which frankly, I like it, where there's complete transparency. But when there is complete transparency, you will see the ugly nature that every so often, and I do mean it's a drop in the ocean. And I've dealt with a lot of detectives, like in this case, this was one of many cases I had during my 30-year police career. And it's really telling when you go from city to city to city and you're receiving assistance from them regarding your case, and they can't do enough for you. And that's telling to the heart and soul of what we do, which is it's in our DNA to help people. And we're especially going to help our brothers and sisters who are trying to put a monster away.
Right. Well, you answered the follow-up question, which was what motivates police officers to do this? I mean, you and I both know that cops are relentless, especially when it comes to solving violent cases. I was never anything but a street cop. I was never a detective. Of course, I worked in a smaller agency. I didn't work in a large city like Phoenix. Worked in the outskirts of Cincinnati. But I enjoyed being a patrol officer and a patrol supervisor, but even then had the opportunity to investigate and solve some violent cases. And from experience, I can attest to the fact that you go after that like a dog to a bone because you are dedicated to finding the answer for that victim. And the reason I bring this up is because of what I perceive to be the most heinous war on the police profession that has ever occurred in the United States of America, which is why I wrote the book, Blue Lies. I waited until I got out of law enforcement. I had the idea for a long time, but I knew that once I wrote that book, it would possibly make me unemployable in law enforcement because of the controversial nature of the topic and my inability to keep my mouth shut. So
you would be canceled.
Absolutely. Cancel culture. And it's not that cops don't agree with what I've said. It's not that police leadership doesn't agree with what I've said. But when you are behind the badge, you have to use discretion and you have to kind of stay under the radar, if you will, because if you don't, then you have a target painted on your forehead. So that's the reason I wanted to talk about this particular case and the fact that you dedicated, how many years was it? Between 1 and 2 years to capture this bad guy who literally ended up ultimately murdering the male in this case and, brutalized this poor lady, because this is what police officers do. There is a huge disconnect, in my opinion, between what the public thinks police officers do on a daily basis and what police officers actually do on a daily basis. And I think that disconnect is mostly because of the way that law enforcement officers are portrayed by what I call the media mob. Now, there are good reporters out there. There is some good news source out there, but by and large, mainstream media has done everything they can to misrepresent law enforcement with every use of force case. Everything you see on TV is skewed to make the police look bad. And that's why I wrote this book. Somebody's got to stand up. And this case that was featured of yours on the ID channel is just one of literally thousands of cases that are investigated by police officers around the country on a daily basis that proves that cops, the law enforcement profession, is not marred, it's not corrupt, it's not systemically racist, as we have been led to believe. It is a dedicated fraternity of men and women who literally stand between the wolf and the sheep. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I agree with your entire assessment. I'll kind of put it in a personal microcosm of what happened to me, I had a dear friend, known her forever. It was one of my wife's high school friends, and I've been married, 36 years.
Congratulations.
So, well, thank you. And
that's a monumental affair for a cop to begin with. Usually police and divorce are synonymous.
Go hand in hand. Yeah. So we were at an event. We are going to go out as couples. And so I was meeting her and her husband. There was like, I don't know, maybe 4 couples, so 8 of us. And she just went, and this is maybe a year ago, tops. She started going off on this tangent about the systematic racism embedded in police. And she's a teacher, and we've always got along. And so I'm just listening at the round table. I'm not going to say anything yet. I'm a couple of years in retirement, so I have no problem in voicing my expert opinion on this subject that she was not an expert opinion on. Right. And so I let her kind of talk, and someone else was defending the police in the table, if you will, who, for lack of a better phrase, had my back, if you want to call it that. And when they're all done, I just kind of, they're agreeing to disagree, if you will, but it was a little bit testy. And I kind of said, how would you like to hear someone weigh in on this that actually knows what they're talking about? And both of them kind of sat back, and I laughed. I said, I'll be honest with you, I'm the only one sitting in this room that has 30 years experience. Granted, it's only the Phoenix Police Department, but I've been to other police departments and training and investigations during my 30-year career. And I've never, not once in my single, not even an iota of racism have I ever seen. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, which is why I told them, but I've never, ever seen it. So if I've never seen it, then how can you say it's systemic if I've never seen it? And my friends have never seen it. And not to say we all were appalled and disgusted by the George Floyd murder, which frankly, I felt it was absolutely, they got it right, the jury.
I agree.
However, unfortunately, we didn't have a Martin Luther King Jr. type individual that would unite based on this common understanding. This is one time I think the whole world could agree, with maybe a few exceptions.
Sure.
And yet, instead of taking that unity and using it to maybe find, because as we know, good police work is always evolving, whether it's technically, whether it's, manpower, which I mean, brothers and sisters, the resources, you're always evolving and getting better. And you always have to. That's why training is, it shouldn't be just yearly. It should be, completely consistent with what you do. And so instead of doing that, the powers that be, whether it be, you could throw out some names, but they absolutely weaponized what happened with law enforcement as this one-off, as the standard bearer. And it wasn't. It was so far removed. In fact, it pissed all of us off. We hate it when someone tarnishes the badge. So instead of having that, they went with this. And I really simply asked her, I said, what gives you that belief? And I knew, as you do, was the media. And it was a certain media, and it was clickbait, with the internet, whatever you hate, you're going to have more of it, whether you're on left, right, middle, it doesn't matter. If you hate it, you're going to be force-fed it because of the monetization of it. So I asked her, and she said, well, you see the videos constantly. I said, okay, let's start from there. How many videos have you seen? Is it like 100 a day? She goes, no. I said, well, how many then? She goes, well, at least 1 a day. I said, okay, that's fair. I'll take that. Let's say all those 365 videos you saw last year were all true. Let's say they all were within a year period, which they weren't. Let's say they all were completely encapsulated, which they weren't. There was something that happened before the camera came on, something after. It was simply their version of what they saw as the worst point they could sensationalize this event. But let's say all that is not the case, and it was 100% valid bad videos. That's 365 in 1 year out of 300 million contacts with police. And you have enough bad scenarios for a poster at the protest rallies, which good for them. I have issues with bad police work. It's not perfect. We're human. We make mistakes, but then there's some bad characters. But if you put it, it's literally a drop in the ocean. So you're just listening to these stupid words like systematic and systemic and embedded and racism, and they've hooked you just like a fish. And good people were buying this. I believe there's a paradigm shift at place now. I really do. I think more and more of these medias are realizing with the high increase in crime, with the demonization has become the dismantling of police departments internally without the people retiring and not wanting to take on such jobs. So I think there is a paradigm shift at place, but it's going to take a long time to turn the ship around.
I agree. And I'll just say, we talked about this when I was on Badge Boys a couple of months ago, that in 20 years I've been riding in a patrol car in one form or fashion and have never once witnessed racism on the part of an officer toward another person. So if it's, and I asked the question, very first chapter of my book, I asked the question, if it's so systemic, how come I haven't seen it? So
I remember that.
I attest to that as well.
Beautiful book, by the way. Beautiful book. I want to just throw that in there. I've read the book. It was absolutely. You are actually a writer, where I'm just a monkey with a crayon. But you were very good.
Well, I appreciate that. It was a pandemic project, so. But it's really a passion for me. Law enforcement's always been a passion for me, and now that I have walked away from law enforcement. You and I both know, once a cop, always a cop. You never lose the mindset. You never hang up the internal investigator or the internal protector. You're always that person. You can't walk away from it. And so I've now turned that passion into standing up for cops. There are many like you and I. You're a veteran radio host, television host. And you and I are a rare breed, and I'll just include myself in that only because I've just kind of entered that arena, that are out there standing up for cops. And there's enough people bashing the law enforcement profession. Somebody has to tell the truth. There's a lot of academics trying to tell the truth that have written great books like The War on Cops by Heather McDonald. She is an excellent author, a scholar. It's an excellent book. It's why it's still a bestseller. But I think that looking at this issue through the eyes of somebody who's spent a career in law enforcement has a specific appeal to it, because you're talking to somebody, as you said, is an expert in the field usually. And so I think that this whole defund the police thing and demonizing the police has backfired on the media mob, because now, as you said, the crime is through the roof, and the murder rates have sometimes doubled in all of the major cities. And now people are calling for the refund the police. The citizens, who are the actual majority in this situation, have started standing up to the vocal minority in the situation. So, and we could spend all evening talking just about that, but I want to move on. I want to mention, I can't talk to you without mentioning what happened last month in Phoenix, in which a gentleman killed his child's mother, held, I guess, another male and a baby hostage. And when the police came in and tried to take control of that situation, 5 cops were shot, 4 more were injured by shrapnel. Luckily, unless I'm completely mistaken, no cops were killed in that event. Nevertheless, that is a high-stress situation in which there was potential for massive loss of life in law enforcement. It could have been just like Dallas was several years ago, when 5 cops were murdered just on that one night, and 12 cops were shot. Luckily, that didn't happen, but that was something that, when I heard it, I immediately thought of you, because you still live there, you spent a career there, and that's the kind of thing that the public, Joe Public, as I call him, Joe and Jane Public, have no idea how that affects somebody in law enforcement, specifically someone who knows the people who were involved. There is I'm trying to say this without coming out and saying it, I guess, but you don't know unless you've been shot at what it's like to be in that situation. And the dynamic there is such a connection between police officers around the nation that we all feel that in some way, shape, or form. Not as much as the ones who were actually there, But because I have a connection to Phoenix Police Department through you, I felt that too, as do cops who don't even know anybody from Phoenix. Did you know anybody who was shot in that encounter last month?
I hate saying it this way, but thankfully I did not. And I hate saying thankfully because then it's all about,
Right.
me,
Sure.
But sadly, in my 30-year career, I've lost quite a few friends to, there at one point, a couple of years ago, we were number one city in police involved shootings. And, again, the ugly, cop haters, the watchdog groups are nothing more than vile people that hate cops and are
Right.
use any situation. So they use that stat, and sure enough, we had an independent investigation, if you will, look into it, and they found that every single case, not one case of that year, had to do with something other than somebody attacking a police officer or attacking another individual in a
Imagine
lethal environment. Yeah, exactly. We didn't even have that George
Yeah.
Floyd scenario. We didn't. It was all completely righteous. So it was more. So to me, it was telling to the other side. Why did we have so many people attacking police more than ever in a lethal confrontation? And I would take it right back to the summer of love, and I'm using air quotes with love. We know what I'm talking about. The 100 straight days of mayhem in Portland. Same thing with Seattle and all across the country. We had so much empowering of criminal activity, so much empowering of violence against police officers. I would never have thought when I started my career I would say these words, but we had police stations burnt to the ground. And it was insane. And to have that type of horror injected against police officers, and then having a large swath of political figures, a large swath of, A and B actors, a swath of sports stars and so forth that weigh in simply to try to be on the woke side of something so that they can, have their voice and be heard against something they know nothing about and do it in such an ugly way. And I'm with you. I think there's a paradigm shift at play, a strong one, where the good people are looking at everything happening and saying, enough's enough. No, I support law enforcement. I support, lawfulness, not unlawfulness, like what you're seeing in unfortunately New York City, which is a beautiful city. And you're seeing the political pundits that have this bizarre idea where you can, they always talk about reimagining policing. Well, you first have to reimagine criminals, and we don't have a magic wand to do that. So, so until you have a magic wand to make this the Garden of Eden, you need police officers that were willing to do it. So, it's definitely without a doubt been this violent episode. Back to your original question about Phoenix. I had talked a couple of years ago, this one young lady who was her mother and father were dear friends of mine, both cops that I worked with over the years. And I was in, like I said, military intelligence, Army. And she was thinking about going into that field or local. She didn't know. So I wasn't talking her into being a Phoenix cop, but I kind of, listed the advantages of doing so.
Right.
It wasn't a year later, she was involved in a shooting. The shooting involved another friend of mine, a commander who was shot and killed, Greg Carnicle. And when I heard her name listed, I broke up. I just screamed because the false information came out with the media. And again, the fog of war, if you will, they get things wrong. But that's okay if it's not meant intentionally or with a false agenda. In this case, it was just, they put out wrong that she had got killed. And it killed me. Yeah. So that killed me. And then thankfully she was okay. She was able to recuperate. We've been having a lot of violence in Phoenix, a lot of police officers.
Just two more. A couple of weeks ago, there were two more Phoenix officers shot.
It's happening every week. We had Taylor, bless his heart, he was shot 8 times, once in the head, and the bad guy was going after his gun to, I guess, steal the gun and execute him, finish the job, but he was unresponsive. Thankfully, he survived, but we would have the stats would be actually a lot higher if not for the brilliant medical profession and the nurses and doctors and what they do to keep us alive. It's amazing. If this was 20 years ago, these officers would not be surviving today. Right. So the stats aren't really consistent with the violence. It's actually much more violence than the stats would reflect based on good medical.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that because that's where I'm going next, because we've talked about the 2020 Summer of Love, air quotes.
Yeah.
But that was really a revival of what started in 2014, 15, 16.
Yes.
With a couple of very high-profile police shootings, one in particular Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, which is where the term we all know, the Ferguson effect, came from. But after...
My hands are in the air.
And don't get me started. There's a whole chapter in the book on that. But what interested me was I found an NPR article. I don't know if it originated with the NPR, but it was published by the NPR, that stated in 2016 that all of this talk about the war on police that was occurring, and we're talking about the time when there were cluster shootings of police officers, when there were ambushes of police officers and all those things going on across the country, that the article in NPR said that the war on police was not actually happening, that the stats didn't bear it up. And the article cited one of the very popular websites that tracks line of duty deaths, and said that the line of duty death rate had actually gone down in the last generation, tracking it all the way back to President Reagan. And so that metric did not support a war on police. And when I read that, I thought, the arrogance is just really monumental to say something like that, because it reminded me of what our very mutual friend, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, wrote in the foreword of my book. He cited the medical technological advances over the last generation that have saved multiple lives, and that if we had the same medical technology now as we did in the 60s, the murder rate in the country would triple or even quadruple. So just because numbers may be down doesn't mean that there's less violence. It just means that the medical technology is catching up with the violence. And we could go back and cite some of the studies and get technical with it, but the fact of the matter is, as you mentioned, we have tremendous medical technology that has saved people's lives that otherwise would have been killed, including cops. So, and I might point out that the war on police isn't just about line of duty deaths. It isn't just about physical attacks on cops. It's about the endeavor of demonization and canceling and demoralizing American police officers. The war on police can be as simple as a cop being refused service at a Starbucks, and it could be as horrendous as a police officer that is wrongfully convicted and their lives ruined, that has never had a physical attack on them. The war on police is about more than just physical violence, which is why that we've got to talk about these things. Every cop knows when you go to the academy and you sign up and you report for duty after all of your training is over, you know what you've signed up for. You know the risks that are involved in it. You know that you may not go home. Every day when you go to work, you know there's a chance that you won't come home that evening. Yet we signed up anyway, right? And we don't. Most cops don't think about the risks on a daily basis. But what cops did not sign up for is to have their constitutional rights taken away, their due process taken away, their qualified immunity taken away, which basically only protects good cops, I might add. Qualified immunity, there is some radical notion out there that qualified immunity just has this protective shield over bad cops. That's not true. A cop has to be acting in good faith, and the evidence has to support that in order for qualified immunity to work. So when you take qualified immunity away, you're just hurting the good cops. and so all of these things amount to the war on police, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so guys like you and I got to keep sounding the alarm.
Yeah, no, 100% true. I had a defense attorney on our show, and I like defense attorneys. I mean, I understand why people don't. I'll be honest with you.
Right.
But considering some of our prosecutors lately, at least they've signed up for the right job. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I've learned more from defense attorneys than I have prosecutors at times. So, anyways, he was on our show, and our debate was qualified immunity. Why he thinks it's a bad thing, and that needs to go away, and why I kind of explained you're insane and you're so wrong on so many levels, and
right.
here's why. And so when you look at qualified immunity, I kind of explained it to him very simply. You're going to have a complete shift of reversals in terms of security and police work. If you remove qualified immunity, then police officers, not once a day, many times a day, are going to be risking their livelihood, their family, their home on a bad scenario, because we respond to calls that are sometimes wrong. We do. And we get, and so it's not that we're getting it wrong, but whether it's relayed wrong, the dispatcher, put something in it that's maybe not correct.
Happens all the time.
We respond. It does every day. And so when we get there, we have to deal with it, and we hopefully do the right job, and we are able to assess the situation appropriately, and we do. But there's times where we detain somebody, whether it's, investigative detention, or whether it's actually physical arrest based on misinformation, and then we get it right. Well, that is an example where qualified immunity protects you, because we got it wrong. We, as a group, through dispatch and so forth, we got it wrong, but we corrected it. And wow, these officers would be losing everything. So who is going to become police officers? It will be the people that don't have anything to lose, i.e., you will, the young security guards who are just starting out their careers. They don't have anything to lose. They're going to become police officers, and good quality police officers are going to be in the private sector protecting the homes of these people that are making these stupid laws. So you're going to have a reversal where it's going to be bad. And again,
the other extreme is you're going to have cops that just stop working. The only way to protect yourself, protect your family, protect your home is just to either sit in the office or find a parking lot somewhere to sit and just not do anything.
No proactive police work.
Right.
And we're seeing that. New York, they got rid of at one time, they've gone back, thank God, but they got rid of all the proactive police officers that were keeping the crime rate down, because we know that proactively you can stop 100 crimes by that first arrest. And everything we're saying is, and we're not saying anything every cop out there doesn't already know. We're just allowed to talk. So back to your point, we need more of us. And that's why I love sharing and being on each other's shows and getting the word out there, the truth.
Absolutely. Well, again, the reason I wrote this book is because I felt like I needed to stand up. And I'm only one person. I'm not a social media celebrity. I'm not an influencer. I don't have a mass social media following. I'm just a beat cop from nowhere, in the suburbs of Cincinnati that just got sick and tired of the misrepresentations of police. And where I come from, misrepresentation, just an old-fashioned lie. Thanks for sitting in with me for my conversation with retired Sergeant Darren Burch of the Phoenix Police Department. Our discussion really was just the beginning of Blue Lies, the war on justice and the conspiracy to weaken America's cops. There are so many other things, so many other stories, so many other people impacted by the misrepresentation of police. You can get Blue Lies, and you should get Blue Lies and read it beginning today at blueliesbook.com. Make sure you leave an Amazon review. Thanks for joining me. Back the blue and be safe.